It's only after we lost the Holy Mass that we started to appreciate it. We started to realize what we've lost is the greatest treasure on earth. The Holy Mass, the traditional Latin Mass, I think was truly the greatest treasure on earth and remains to this day to be our greatest treasure. It's the Ark of the Covenant that the Jews had, but this is the true Ark of the Covenant. You know, the Ark of the Covenant housed some miraculous things. It had the pot of manna, that the manna was the food that fell from heaven and miraculously fed the Jews in their years in the desert. It had the rod of Aaron, which you remember that rod Moses used to strike the Red Sea. And Moses used in front of Pharaoh too before then to, do all these miracles. That rod worked so many miracles. Remember, it turned into a snake in front of Pharaoh. And that rod was in the ark. They also had in there the tablets of the 10 Commandments that Moses had been given by God. Actually, the second set. Remember, Moses became the first man to break all 10 Commandments when he smashed them. He in his anger, he smashed them because the Israelites were worshiping the golden calf. And so then God gave him a second set. And that second set of tablets of stone were also in that ark. So the Ark of the Covenant was the most precious thing that the Israelites had. And they put it into the Holy of Holies. When Solomon built the temple, they had this gorgeous temple. But then inside the temple, in the innermost part of the temple, was a place called the Holy that was even more beautiful. And only the priests could go in there. And they would offer a daily sacrifice there. But inside that Holy was the innermost room of the temple called the Holy of Holies, where only the high priest could go in. And he could only go in once a year on the Passover to offer a sacrifice of blood. Now, and in that room, in the Holy of Holies, is where they put the Ark of the Covenant. And I'm pointing out to you that our Mass is the true Holy of Holies. Or you should say it's the true Ark, where in that Mass, there are so many things that are just miraculous, or you say it's where heaven meets earth. Here on earth, the Holy Mass is where heaven and earth come together. And that's why, and we'll talk about this in a little bit when we go over the prayers of the Mass, but when the priest goes up the steps to go up to the altar, he's praying that he might be made worthy to enter into the Holy of Holies. You read that every day in Mass, and you should stop and reflect on what it's saying to you. We're going into the Holy of Holies, the most glorious and precious place we could ever be on the face of this earth. All of my family is from Detroit. Uncles, aunts, my mom and dad, everyone's from Detroit. Detroit was a very Catholic city at one time. A lot of Polish people, a lot of Italian people, a lot of Irish settled there. And because they're all settled in Detroit, there's all kinds of Catholic churches. It was originally founded by the French, and they were Catholic too, of course. So Detroit was a very Catholic city, and there are churches all over the place. And it's rather funny because the churches are still standing to this day. There's St. Josaphat is right on I-75 in Detroit. It was the Polish church. And they would have their Sunday sermons in Polish. Half a mile to the east is Sweetest Heart of Mary, which is a beautiful church. So beautiful, it would knock your eyes out. And that church was built by the Germans and the Irish. and then half a mile south of Sweetest Heart of Mary is Sacred Heart. And Sacred Heart was where all the black Catholics went. Because in those days there was segregation even in church a lot of times. And, well, they all went to their own church. It seems strange to us that why would you have churches so close together? The Poles and the Irish and the Germans and the blacks, they're all Catholic, but they all went to their own parish. Well, that's just the way it was in those days. Now those churches are standing so close to one another. And I look at them now and I say, that's so strange. They built such big churches so close to each other. And it's beautiful in a way, but what I was going to say to you is that it was too easy to be Catholic in those days. You could go anywhere to Mass, of course. Catholics know that. You can go anywhere to Mass to fulfill your Sunday obligation, any Catholic church. And so, Mass schedule at St. Josaphat would be 7, 8, 9, 10, or whatever. Same at Sweetest Heart of Mary, or maybe at the half hour, or whatever. At Sacred Heart might have a Mass at 12:30 or something. So no matter what, you never worried about missing Mass. I can sleep in. I'm going to catch the 1 o'clock Mass. And that was always the latest Mass you could go to, 12:30 or 1 o'clock, and a number of you will remember those days. I picked up a bulletin in Houston. It was actually stuck in an old book, and I found this old bulletin. It was from Sacred Heart Church in Houston, Texas, and their Mass schedule just was so incredible to me. They had Mass at 5. This is Sunday Mass schedule. 5, 5:30, 6, 6:30, then like 7:30, 8:30, 9:30, and then 11, 12. It was something like that. I was just looking and going, oh my goodness, they have Mass all the time. And it started so early. You could go to Mass all the time, all day long if you wanted to, or all morning long. Because remember, in those days, they didn't have Mass after 1 o'clock in the afternoon. It wasn't permitted until the later 50s, I believe. So the church was flourishing, but Catholics, I think, were growing lax because it was so easy. Those of you who are old enough to remember will recall how it was back in the 1950s, in the sense that you could go anywhere for Mass, you could have confessions. Confessions were always available Saturday afternoon. All the kids went to Catholic school. It was just, things were nice, but almost too easy. And because of that, I think Catholics grew kind of lax, and they started to think, as things are easy, you want things to become even easier. You just always are pushing for easier things. So, it started to become, Catholics were becoming lukewarm, and so the quicker the Mass, the better. Sermons were, at least the sermons that I've found in books, it just seems to me there's too much of an emphasis on political things, like communism. Even though communism was a great evil of those days, there's too great of an emphasis on it. And you don't see the spirituality that should have been there, at least not for the most part. It just seems like there was too much of this sort of a direction towards the social aspects in the church. There were dances every Friday night, or Saturday night, in almost every parish. My uncle told me this. He said, we would go to St. Martin's, if we didn't see any nice-looking girls there, eligible girls. We'd go over to Assumption Grotto, see what was going on at their dance. If we didn't find anyone there, we'd go to this parish or whatever. We'd go somewhere else. My uncle was telling me, that's just how it was. All these parishes had these social activities all the time. And, it was just maybe a little bit too much of an emphasis on that, too much of an emphasis on the political situation in the world. And Catholics were losing their love for the Mass. Their spirituality was disappearing. So is it any wonder then that when Vatican II was called by Pope John the 23rd, when he became Pope, one of his first things he did, he became Pope, in October 1958, he called for Vatican II almost immediately. That is, that he decided there should be a council to finish what Vatican I had started. Now, just so you know, there was nothing wrong with John the 23rd calling for a council, because Vatican I had not been completed. If you remember, the Vatican Council in 1870, 1871 had to be stopped short because of the Franco-Prussian War. And a lot of things had not been discussed.